Shaka King, you wrote and directed Judas and the Black Messiah, about the FBI plot against Black Panther chairman Fred Hampton, which led to Hampton's ultimate assassination. Was this a story that you've wanted to tell on screen for a while?
No, and actually, no. The story was really first brought to me by the Lucas brothers. Um, and I was aware of Fred Hampton. Uh, Quite honestly, I was more aware of the tragic circumstances surrounding his death than I was of how he lived. And so, really researching this film was really an education for me into his life, into his ideas, his politics, and his achievements in a very short amount of time.
And what was it like meeting the his actual family, his actual surviving family, as you're trying to make this film? Because I know like you met with them before making it.
Yeah, we really forged a relationship with them over the course of a year, and I think ultimately that was what led to their willingness to come on as cultural consultants, and that had Chairman Fred Hampton Jr. on set 90% of the time while we were shooting, and that experience was incredible. Even in its challenges, it was incredible. It was an opportunity for growth. I think on everyone's part, certainly I can speak on my behalf, tremendous growth, and on his as well. Just because we really had to find points of interest. He'd read the script, many drafts of the script prior to showing up on set, but it's a very different thing reading something and then seeing it come alive. And in the moment, there would be issues that needed to be addressed. And in those moments, either I would have to figure out a way to accommodate his needs, or he would have to, figure out how he could digest the bad news that we weren't going to be able to accommodate him and his comrades' desires. And it was challenging, but I know that the movie and I certainly am better off for it.
And researching Hampton, there's so much video footage of him. How did all that inform your writing of him as a character?
I actually don't feel like there is a ton of video footage of him, considering all he accomplished and the kind of power that he wielded. It was useful. It was all useful. The reading books and articles and watching footage of him, listening to footage, his recordings of his speeches, speaking with former members of the Illinois chapter, researching the chapter as a whole, and reading some of the books that they read in their political education courses, and ultimately, obviously, speaking with his son and his wife, would have been wife, and Akua Nigeri, formerly known as Deborah Johnson.
What did you most want to capture about Fred Hampton, like as a person, besides beyond his political organizing and that persona that's known, and that's been covered in the past?
I think just the sort of love and tenderness. When you speak to his son, one thing that he talks about, not just in regards to his father, but the chapter and really the Panthers on the whole, is this idea that they live to serve the people, that they were servants for the people. And you don't really have you don't adopt that kind of politic if you don't come just from emotionally a place of love. And so that was something that we tried to certainly infuse in his character.
And were all of the speeches that we see in the film, were those taken from real speeches, or were there any that you created or expanded for the film?
We certainly added lines and created lines, myself and my co-writer Will Burson, but we tried as much as possible to remain faithful to his words. The truth of that is that there's only one scene where we kind of veer from his words a bit, and that was because we hadn't officially brought on board Fred Hampton Jr. and Akua Najeri. So he didn't have permission to, use the speeches as they'd been written. And it wasn't until after we recorded that one scene that they came on board and we were able to, use all of his speeches.
And of course, having the right actor play Fred Hampton in this story is so crucially important. How did Daniel Kaluuya become part of this film, and what was it like working with him to create that persona?
Well, I told Ryan during our first conversation that I wanted to cast Daniel as Fred, and it turned out that Ryan was about to go into reshoots for Black Panther. So when he got there, he told Daniel what we were interested in, and he and I met in New York soon after, and we basically agreed to come on almost, not quite immediately, but very soon after. And what was it like to work with him and sort of find this character? Incredible. I mean, I've told people, Daniel, he's one of the best dramatists I've ever met. I would kill to have him read anything I write for the rest of my life. Because he's an incredibly thoughtful and intelligent writer. And so he not only was it great to build this character with him, but it was great to improve the script, with a lot of his input and insight.
And the film tells Hampton's story, a lot of it through the framework of William O'Neill's story, who was the FBI informant who ultimately helps the FBI assassinate him. What did you think about that, that character and who he was going into it? And did you find kind of more sympathy, humanity, empathy for him and the positions that he was put in as you were making the film and telling the story?
Ultimately, I always thought of William O'Neill as, essentially an opportunist. He's a person who, I think honestly, he's a person who recognizes that, he's intelligent, he's good looking, and he's clever. And, if he was born white, he'd be a captain of industry. But he's not. So he's a criminal. And, those two things often are the same. And so, he's a guy who is just trying to, in a lot of ways, he's bought into the idea in many ways of the American dream. And he's in pursuit of it, and he's willing to pursue it by any means necessary. And he makes certain choices. And, these choices lead to him kind of in this crazy loop and cycle where, he just digs himself deeper into this hole that he's trying to climb out of. So I can't say I quite feel sympathy for him, but I recognize that ultimately he's reacting to a system that is far more powerful than him. And I think the difference is that, in a lot of ways, him and Fred Hampton were kind of reacting to the same constructs, I just think that Fred Hampton had a different definition of freedom and power than he had. For Fred Hampton, power was people. It was equity for all folks, and them having the right to actually self-actualize. It was the ideals that America claims to have but doesn't actually practice. And for William O'Neill, power and freedom were, access to material wealth, were, just the things that in a lot of ways America and capitalism prioritizes and kind of tells us what we should seek and appreciate. So I just feel like in a lot of ways, O'Neill is an American tragedy because he's a sentinel for the state ultimately that uses him and it destroys his life. He's incredibly American.
And Fred Hampton was killed in December of 1969, and so filming of the film coincided with the 50th anniversary of his death. Was that at that point, was that I imagine that would be a more emotional day, and kind of the weight of the story would hit differently when that hit.
It was a crazy day. It was the day that Lakeith as O'Neill had to drug Fred, and and it was also nearing the end of our shoot. So it was one of Daniel's last days. And I remember getting a call from Sean Richards, our head makeup artist, and she said that Lakeith had been throwing up in his trailer and crying all morning. And he showed up on set of rec. And, I remember telling him that, out of all of us, he was making the greatest sacrifice because, Daniel's playing an icon. That's its own set of challenges. Dominique is playing a living icon. That's another set of challenges. But Lakeith has the thankless job of playing this person who he's nothing like, who he really repulsed him certainly at the beginning of the movie. And I think of him inhabiting the character. And I think over the course of having to play this person, he got to a place where he understood him, even if he didn't sympathize or even empathize with him. Even though I think he did, and he had to go to some places. Speaking with him, he had to access some old memories that I can't imagine the trauma he really put himself through. But on that particular day, it was incredibly difficult for him in particular. So I felt for him.
And what strikes me about this story when I watched it was realizing how young these people were. Fred Hampton was 21 when he was killed. William O'Neill was 20, and Deborah Johnson was 19. And yet, they've all come to such different places in their lives, but especially Fred Hampton has developed such wisdom and leadership at such a young age. Like, what did you think about that character in terms of, and all the characters in terms of just being this young and being thrust into these positions?
Well, I feel like if you look at so many revolutions, young people are at the center and the heart of it. And that's because they have a lot of life in front of them. They hope, they certainly believe they do. They don't have anything yet to lose, i.e., they haven't bought into the house and 2 cars and, et cetera, et cetera. They just don't have the trappings of stuff. And there's just, I think a number of factors that kind of lead them to sort of be the ones who are agents for change across the board. So like, I knew that and have always been impressed by that. But, I think it's something that just, it doesn't pertain exclusively to the Black Panthers. I feel like if you look at movements across the globe, it's always been young people at the center.
And we've been seeing movements, of course, in the last year with the Black Lives Matter protests after Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, and it feels like a lot of the things that the film is depicting from 50 years ago haven't really changed that much, or at least not enough. What do you think about how this film sort of fits into the current movements and the current struggles for equality, and how it contextualizes kind of our history around that?
It's, like you said, these topics are evergreen. And, I kind of think in a lot of ways it remains to be seen, and it's not necessarily up to me to say its place in the context of what's happening in the world. I think the people who see the movie who are in that space, who are engaged in direct action, will let me know if they feel like it applies to their current struggles that they're facing day in and day out. Just as a citizen, I feel like it definitely resonates, with today in a way that I knew going in, because like I said, nothing has changed, but I didn't anticipate that, you know, people's eyes and ears would be open the way they are now because of the last year and a half. And also the fact that their eyes are glued to the TV in a way that they have never been. So I don't know. I think it remains to be seen. I do feel, though, kind of confident that it has some utility, just because people have been trying to tell this story for so many decades, and there's always been roadblocks. And for us to, you know, be able to make a studio movie with the family of Fred Hampton and the blessing of, you know, many members of the Illinois chapter, that feels like it must be for some greater purpose, you know.
Yeah, part of the change that I've felt in the past year, at least, like with the latest Black Lives Matter protests, is that there's been more of a widespread questioning of not just our relationship to the police, but also the media's relationship to the police, and you know how everything from Dragnet to Law and Order kind of gives us a certain perspective on those sorts of things. But we're starting to kind of unravel that in a way that feels like it opens a door for a film like this to show you, it's like, oh, this is also the history of police, and this is where we've been, and this is where we are in some degree. Do you feel like there's that sense of openness there too in terms of media?
I certainly have been tracking the discussions around it, and it's great to hear, because I remember watching True Detective, season 1, which I really enjoyed. I loved it. And it wasn't until like, I don't know, probably like a second or third watch, that I remember this one scene where Matthew McConaughey's character goes to visit this like mechanic who knows the whereabouts of the serial killer and doesn't feel like telling him. And Matthew McConaughey beats him up and, you know, gets the information, and it's framed as a heroic act. And I remember watching that and going, oh, that's a big part of the reason why cops kill us and beat us and don't even get to a trial. The grand jury is just like, nah, don't try this person. And just like the sort of hierarchical nature that the media has traditionally given law enforcement, you know what I'm saying, over, as if, you know, we're all flesh and blood and bone, you know what I mean? So like, why is the life of, you know, a police officer worth more than the life of a teacher? You know, why doesn't a teacher get a special, you know, burial, you know, and that kind of treatment? I mean, it's just, and it's because of narratives that we have culturally developed over the course of hundreds of years, and those narratives have worked their ways into our tools of telling narratives, sharing narratives. You know what I mean? Newspaper articles, movies, books, TV, all of the things we consume is just stories and narratives. You know, and so that's an old one. That's an old one that is so embedded in everything that we consume that I don't think we've as a culture barely started to question it up until now. We're just kind of seeing people talk about that. And so, you know, I think now is a great time to introduce something like this, to sort of see how the way that we've chosen to frame relationships with police and citizens. What, you know, how do people feel about that in light of everything we've seen prior, you know?
Well, I want to congratulate you on the film, and thank you so much for talking with me about it. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you. Nice talking to you too. Take care.